I want to welcome today David Ferguson to the Dr. Davenport Show. David has worked for 10 presidential campaigns and 5 presidents. He's traveled more than 1 million miles. He's also started his career in government as a staff assistant in the Gerald Ford White House. David is now the director of GrassRoots Global Institute for the Jacoby Center for Public Service and Civic Leadership at the University of Pacific. David, welcome to the show.
Well, Lawrence, it's great to be with you today. I am really impressed with the fact that you're undertaking this enterprise, and I just want to tell you that I hope the weather on your side of the coast is as good as the weather is here.
It is fantastic.
It's a great day in California.
It's always a great day in Florida. And as I always like to say, it's when you wake up in the morning and you're alive and you're living in America, you're already got a head start.
Well, that's true.
You've had a tremendous career, and it's not over yet, but a tremendous career working for 5 presidents, 10 presidential campaigns. You've seen it from working in the agency. You're, from the Small Business Administration to the Department of Energy to the Department of Education to the Department of Transportation. So you bring a unique perspective of looking at how this is. Now we're entering in the crazy season, where we're going to have the most expensive presidential campaign in history. And we used to say in the government, who struck John documents, and you're watching this go on day to day. And remember back in the Reagan years that you would be these events that you would plan and say, okay, this is our theme for the week. And we all knew, every department knew not to step on the president's message that week. I've watched with interest in this latest round of when people in the President Obama's administration step on the president's message. You have Joe Biden coming on television and say he is for marriage of alternative lifestyles, being able to marry each other. The president wasn't prepared for that message at that time. He got ahead, of his leader because he didn't really. Because you have people now who are looking at their own interests, where they're going, and not saying, hold it, the president has not authorized me to make that statement. Then you have the Secretary of Education making the statement, and so then now you push the president to make a statement before he was ready. Not that he wasn't going to make that statement. I have no idea when the president was going to make the statement. But during the Reagan years, there was a theme, and every department knew you don't step on your boss's theme. What's going on?
You don't if you want to have a future. Well, what's going on, I think, really is technology. What we're doing here today is a prime example of what's happening. I think that if you go back and look at the history of the presidency and the history of presidential campaigns, you find that it's just the escalation, it's the increasing velocity and the increasing momentum that has been developed in the campaign process by virtue of technology and communications. If you go back to the days of FDR as a kind of a benchmark, the press corps in the White House in those days sat outside of the president's Oval Office, and whenever they wanted to say something to the press, Roosevelt's press secretary just went to the door and opened it and said, "Hey, fellows, come on in." You notice I said fellows, because with the possible exception of a lady named Helen Thomas, they were mostly fellows. And contrast that today to the fact that any time the president speaks, he's under the scrutiny of a worldwide press presence. And campaigns have gone through much the same kind of thing. I remember when I first went to work for the Ford campaign and the White House, that we used to be able to control the story pretty tightly, as much as anything by what time of day we did things. If we wanted it on the evening news tonight, we knew that we could do it in the morning before about 2 o'clock. But after 2 o'clock, we couldn't do it for tonight's news because the networks had to have the film shipped to New York, edited, turned around, and made into a package for that night's newscast. On the other hand, by the same token, if we wanted it to be in the morning paper, like, for instance, the Washington Post, then we waited until after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, did the event, and we were assured of the fact that the morning papers were going to get the story. So those were simple controls that we were able to exert. There were usually about 2 news cycles to a 24-hour period, and we knew how to manage them. Today, there are, say, a dozen news cycles in an hour on CNN or Fox News or whatever. So that's a lot of what's happened, is just the intensity of the campaign process. The other thing is money. You know, we are seeing, for the first time in my lifetime, we're seeing a campaign that's really costing about what it probably should. People are always astonished when I say that, but, you know, when you think about how much money General Motors, General Electric, Chevrolet, all these big advertisers, the cereal companies spend in a year on advertising. Presidential campaigns are pretty inexpensive, really. Just looking at events like the Olympics, which we're seeing right now, and the Super Bowl, which we saw in the wintertime, and considering the amount of money that gets spent on media for those events, the cost of presidential campaigns is not that excessive. People forget that in a presidential campaign, successful candidates and incumbent presidents are forced to organize and set up campaign operations in 50 states. They're forced to hire thousands of people. They're forced to deal with media buys across the country. If you want to run for a statewide office in Texas today or in California, you better be prepared to spend at least $40 to $50 million just on television advertising. So big money has made a real significant change in the way campaigns operate, the way they do their business.
Well, the Supreme Court decision, which now allows corporations to campaign and give funds to campaigns, and you're seeing the large amount of money that billionaires can give to campaigns, 13 or 14 billionaires, and I think this is going to change the politics. But I think when you look back and you look back to the Ed Rollins and the Lynn Nonsigers, the Ed Meese and the Mike Devers in the Reagan years, and how they strategized on what they wanted the president's message to be, and the discipline of it. And also I want to say the Nixon years, and the discipline of those and when they wanted that message to be. And today it doesn't seem like that's not happening. You send out someone to be your surrogate who's supposed to be pledging their allegiance to the president or the presidential candidate, and they get there and they start doing things which are not in the best interest of the candidate, which are their own personal opinions or their own personal ambitions, that they want to run for governor or senator or president of the United States, rather than, and I think that we need to have surrogates who sign on, and when they sign on, they're saying that we're going to put our own personal opinions into the background. If I can't sign on to what the president believes, then I'm not going to be a surrogate. If I can't sign on to what the presidential candidate's going to be, then I shouldn't be one of his surrogates, because I'm going to be asked to make statements that the president or the president's candidate believes that I may not agree with. And they know that going in. They're not surprised. But instead they're looking for their own future rather than looking at their candidate's future and saying, well, hold it, I'm here on TV. Or let's take Vice President. When the Vice President made his statement, the President wasn't ready for that statement to be made. Or when you see the various different mayors when they're representing or governors when they're representing the president or the presidential candidate, they make a statement that's different than the party.
Well, there's certainly truth in all of that. I think my recollection would be that, with all of the candidates and the campaigns right up and through probably the Dole campaign in '96, surrogates were surrogates. And they were fairly well managed and controlled, and they knew what their job was, and they stuck to it pretty much. Mm-hmm. But again, I think that the explosion of the 24/7 news business has really encouraged this problem with surrogates in the fact that they are constantly being offered the opportunity to speak their opinion. And as you say, we have surrogates who often have their own agenda, which may or may not coincide directly with the candidate. And so it has become a very tough thing for a campaign to control. Now, I think that incumbents in the White House still have a much firmer control over the surrogates than the challenger, because the incumbent still controls one thing that's very important to every surrogate that's out there, and that's their job. Surrogates know that at the end of the day, the incumbent is going to control their future if he's reelected by virtue of whether or not they keep their job or they get promoted. With challengers, on the other hand, they depend upon surrogates who are willing to get involved with the campaign on the premise that something might happen when it's over and if their challenger wins. So there's not as much of an incentive for them to stick to the script. And also the fact is that we have seen here in the last few years some definite evolving lines of thought about what should be done in the country that are not necessarily a lockstep agreement. Mm-hmm. And so now you've got, in the Republican Party, for instance, you've got views as disparate as Ron Paul and Mitt Romney. And so it's harder now to find surrogates who are willing to sign up to the party line.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that you have to agree to everything that your candidate is saying when you're a surrogate, but I'm saying that you really should be signing up for the major agenda of your candidate. And so that if you personally, and especially when something has been in the news all week, and you sign up to be on a Sunday morning talk show, Face the Nation or Meet the Press, that question is going to come up. And if you're not prepared to say that, what the governor's position or the president's position is, you shouldn't go. Because you're sending them off message when you do that. And I'm saying everybody has a free will, but when you're signing up to be that person's spokesperson, you're really supposed to be reinforcing their position, not your position.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, but how do you go about, this last couple of weeks they've had the big debate in Washington that you mentioned earlier. And you see the senator makes his comments. The Romney campaign tries to respond to those comments. What do you see how this is all playing out? Because we have this 24-hour news cycle now. You have all kinds of news outlets. You have tremendous growth of talk radio. And you have also Internet.
Well, three things have happened that have really driven this process to the point we're at. One is the 24/7 news cycle. There's always somebody on somewhere. And so therefore there's a bottomless pit of need for material. The second thing that's happened is that people in the news business, in many instances, have ceased to be reporters, correspondents, objective news gatherers, and have instead become news personalities. And so they've become a part of the story rather than covering the story. And the third thing that's happened is that the old ideals of party loyalty and personal loyalty have been somewhat mitigated and undermined by this explosion of technology. It's a case in which, when I was a young man in the Ford White House, we had a chief of staff named Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney used to walk around the White House, and he used to say quite often, and with some degree of force to all of us, we are here to have a passion for anonymity. We only have one president, and we are here to serve that office. And so it was not something that people easily did to go out and express their own viewpoint or go on a show and say what they thought. The fact is that we knew that it was the president who represented the nation and was elected. And of course, you mentioned Mike Deaver and Lyndon Nofziger and the others in the Reagan years, and the same thing pertained there. I think that people understood that they came with Ronald Reagan, that Ronald Reagan had a very clear set of principles and values, and he had a very clear picture in his mind of what he had gone to Washington to do, and most of the people close to him had shared that vision for a long time, for many years in some cases. And so I think that there was a feeling in general that they were there to serve him and to serve what he was trying to accomplish. And so they didn't feel like it was correct for them to be out promoting their own agenda. Whereas today, you know, we have a situation in which people come to political power, as you said, with their own ideas, with their own agenda, and in many cases they look at it as an opportunity to express that. Once they get in a key spot or in a key position, they're able to use it to leverage their own agenda. And of course, a lot of that is driven now by the money process and by the people who are being appointed. I know that one of my mentors and longtime colleagues was Congressman Bill Archer from Houston. And he used to say that in politics, he who pays the piper calls the dance. And so I think that's starting to be apparent as well. With these big donors and the folks that are really financing the current campaigns, they expect to have a voice in what happens afterward. And they have a lot of influence over who's appointed, the jobs that they're put in, and what they do once they get there. Mm-hmm. So those are a lot of changes that have taken place in recent years.
Well, you know, one of the things which has amazed me as I've watched over the last few years, and it doesn't matter who the president is, this increased leaking of information, government information by people. And that has become unacceptable. I'm talking about things which are not necessary that you need to know as an American citizen. And the competition amongst the press is that they publish this. And a lot of this is, I believe, does harm to our troops that are in combat, to have information leaked at inappropriately. And we're losing sight of that there's a reason why, you know, I don't want everything to be secret. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there is a right for the government to have some secrets, and when they can endanger people's lives who are aiding America in different countries or whatever. And I'm just there seems to be no control. You know, people now leak, and we kind of treat them like they're some kind of hero, rather than that they have endangered American lives. You know, and I think there needs to be bringing us back to how do we understand that when you take a job, you take a pledge to protect the United States, and that doesn't mean that you start every time some confidential or paper come across, you don't think about, well, I can make a relationship with this reporter or that reporter, rather than thinking of the country's good.
Well, I think that's true, and I think one of the things that has been rather disturbing in the last couple of decades here has been the growing phenomenon of people leaking. I remember that years ago, Art Buchwald, who's no longer with us, but Art Buchwald wrote a book called Washington is Leaking. Well, if he were to write that same book today, I think he would probably have to say Washington is drowning, because the leaking has become so prolific and so widespread that I think he would find that it was just appalling even to an open-minded journalist like himself. You're right. There are some things that, for security reasons, for ethical reasons, are really matters that should be preserved and held securely. And it's just unfortunate that my own brethren in the media world have a divided view of that. There are journalists, there are working media people who still preserve the sanctity of secure information. There are others who see it as their ticket to the next, Woodward and Bernstein.
Well, my problem is, and I'm not saying that the press are doing anything wrong. If someone gives you some document, you're gonna publish it. What I'm talking about, David, is really the people who took an oath, and then working in a various different agency, and then they start leaking information out that they've crossed the line. If you really believe that your agency is doing something that you don't want to believe in, then quit. You know, you quit that job and you go do something else. But your answer cannot be that you're going to put yourself above country and the troops are in combat or people who are aiding us in various different things. Well, I just think we need to get back to where when you're a public servant, you know, you work on the behalf of the citizens of the United States, and it's to protect. You know, and a lot of the police cars you used to see, to protect and serve.
That's
you know,
right.
and our role as a public servant is really to protect and serve the people of the United States. It shouldn't be about how it's going to make me look. How am I going to get to my next assignment? You know, how am I going to get this 4 reporters on my side? You know, and if you can't get the reporter on your side by the job you're doing, you don't need them on your side. It should always be the call. We should always be answering what's in the country's best interest. You know, and I know that people can rationalize about anything and say, well, yeah, leaking this material is in the country's best interest. But we have to get away from that. We have to get back to where you have ethical behavior when you're in a job, and that ethical behavior meant that you took the pledge, and then that means you don't leak. You know? And so I think we need to, as we're getting a chance now, in the next few months we're going to have an election again. And no matter how it comes out, I'm hoping that we come back to a new sense of rededicating ourselves to America, and that people start looking at not in it what's in it for, if we could use the Kennedy philosophy that, you know, when he said, you know, it's not what the country can do for you, it's what you can do for the country. You know, we need to rebirth that. Or, you know, and remember when Ronald Reagan was talking about sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're in there fighting crocodiles, that the reason you get into the swamp was to drain it, you know?
That's right.
And so we need to have a new vision, and I'd like to see a new code, a code of ethics for everybody who works in government, you know, and that we're gonna be open, but we're not going to be open where it endangers other individuals for our own self-promotion. Well, David, I really want to thank you very much for coming on the show today. Your experience in over many, many years, I shouldn't say it that way, but is great. You're a real true resource, a great American, and I'm glad to have that you took the time to be with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, you can also follow us on the DrDavenportShow.com, and there's also a Tell of the Day. And thank you very much for joining us on the Lawrence Davenport Show.
It's been great to be with you. Thank you for having me.